Hello.
Hey there. Did you change my Zoom password when you were futzing with it yesterday?
No,
It got changed.
I used the one on the one password. The only thing that I did right now is I logged on Zoom and it was yours. So I had to log off and log on mine on the web, but didn't change the password.
I wonder if that's why, because you can't be logged in twice, so it kept airing me out. So you have to have your own login.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Erica. Hello, Jen. All right, give everybody a second to join us here. And V, can you ping Polly, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And there's a very large trash truck outside my house, so my bulldog Tuka is freaking out. So I apologize for the background noise. Just make sure I got the right. Yep. My date on my deck is wrong. Not sure how that happened. Eric and Jen, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Awesome. Welcome, Yasmin.
Hi.
We're just giving everybody a couple more minutes.
Come on.
This might be a record for smallest class ever. Yeah. Give folks one more minute and then we can get started because I want to respect the time of the folks who are here and.
Oh, I can't make it work. Sorry, Adam.
All right, and who is here with STW Coalition?
Good morning. Hi, my name is Michaela.
Hey, Michaela, welcome.
Hey.
Is this your first fundraising Friday?
No, I actually was able to attend the mid and large giving, and I missed the second one between this one and that. So
Gotcha. Well, we will do a little bit of catching up.
Awesome.
Go ahead and get started here. I'll just keep my eye and see if we get anybody joining. I think I know that this is a huge graduation day here in Florida. My niece is graduating tomorrow. So I know that we have parents on our team and everything that are off today. So I don't know if it is just that time of year. So welcome everyone to the second installment of our Telling Your Story for Fundraising class. This is the back half of the month, so we will be doing a deep dive based on your feedback from our session 2 weeks ago. The recordings of those sessions are available on the Resilience Initiative website in their password protected portal. So if you missed it and want to go back and catch up, the deck is there, the recording is there. And coming out of that discussion, everybody said they wanted to see how do you actually operationalize a storytelling strategy. So that is what we're going to dive into today. And we've got only 6 of us on the phone, so we will keep it super informal and conversational. Also on the call here, we have Violeta Bermudez, who is our chief storyteller. Say hi, V.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So you have 2/5 of the Progressive Multiplier team, and Polly Skamatopoulos should be joining us shortly. I'm wondering if she's having internet issues. So if you see any of us around or want to connect on LinkedIn, please do so. We love to get to know our strategic assistance partners. Here at Progressive Multiplier, for those of you who haven't heard the spiel, we are a funding intermediary and we fund fundraising experiments for progressive nonprofits. If you think you'd be interested in working with us directly as a grantee, we fund groups in 3 different program areas: achieving justice, realizing democracy, and restoring the environment. We work primarily with groups that do revenue generation projects, and they're working towards systemic change, running campaigns, doing get out the vote work, litigation, civic engagement, all of that good stuff. So if you think you might be interested in applying to us for a grant directly for your revenue generation support, feel free to reach out to Polly or myself. We have 2 groups on the phone here today. We have folks through the Resilience Initiative, largely Packard grantees, and then we've got folks from the Leaders Trust who are Flexible Leadership Award winners. So please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and your organization and your role. We have executive directors, fundraising directors, digital fundraising managers, sometimes volunteers. So we always like to know who is joining us. As I mentioned, our sessions are all recorded. And if you can't get access to the Resilience Initiative portal, please reach out to Michelle Mangle at the Resilience Initiative. She can hook you up with access. Our partnership with the Resilience Initiative and Leaders Trust is to provide 2 things. One, direct fundraising coaching. We offer 5-hour blocks, and we will work with you on any fundraising project you'd like. We are now booking our slots for July through December. So if you're interested in any one-on-one coaching, reach out to Michelle and she can send you the sign-up form. We do just about everything, board trainings, campaign planning, major gift training, staff culture trainings, if it has to do with revenue generation, we're down with talking about it. So don't hesitate to reach out if you are interested in some coaching. We also do, as part of this partnership, our Fundraising Fridays, which is what brings us here today. We have 1 more month in this quote unquote school year. So I'm super excited about our June sessions. This came up a couple of months ago and people wanted to talk about the nonprofit industrial complex and what we mean when we say that, and the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. So on June 10th, we're going to talk about sort of history of the nonprofit sector, how government's business and nonprofit are related by structure for better or worse, looking at then how nonprofits were designed to be the social service sector in this country and how that affects our ability to do our missions. And then we're going to get into sort of the nitty gritty in the back half of the month and talk about like, how do we navigate that as practitioners? How do we challenge where the nonprofit industrial complex holds up inequity? And how do we critically examine our roles in it? So going to be juicy, very excited. We are starting to plan our curriculum for July through December. So if there is anything you are dying to learn, want to dig into, please email Polly or I so that we can start planning that curriculum. No subject is off the table as long as it is a legal means to make money for a nonprofit. We will talk about it. So any questions or discussion you want to have here? Open to any and all. All right. I will dig in. Please, please, please send us your suggestions for classes so that we're not just talking about what we want to talk about. You can feel free to do that over email. I'm just texting Polly here to make sure she's okay. All right. So we're going to use Progressive Multiplier, our happy nonprofit and staff of 5, as our case study today in terms of how do we tell stories. So we're going to take the structure, the 5-element structure that we learned last class, and show how we actually put that in action. And Violetta is the primary owner of putting that stuff into action and production. And we will be completely honest about the good, the bad, and the ugly that we've had along the way in designing this system for ourselves. So as I say, I want to keep it really conversational, so jump in wherever you like. Before we get into the actual 5 elements of storytelling strategy and how we operationalize them, there are just a handful of things that I wanted to make sure we're really grounded in. So when we talk about storytelling in a nonprofit, we're talking about the stories about us, right? Our work, our mission, our staff, how we do it, etc. You have to ground your story in your what we call your brand structure. So I have this note at the bottom of the slide that if you can't build this chart for your organization, you can't tell the right story to grow your base. So these are the 7 things you have to be super clear on before you invest any money or time or effort into putting together a storytelling strategy. So we talked about brand truth being the ground that you stake your work in. So this isn't about you. This is about the fundamental thing somebody has to believe that your work is right. So for us, that's organized people and organized money create power in a democracy, and diversifying both the people and the money we organize creates exponentially more and more durable power. So before somebody is going to play with us, they have to be down with our brand truth. Our vision, so this is the thing that happens if we accomplish our work and we do our work. So for us, that's a progressive movement with the power to achieve justice, realize democracy, and restore the environment. You might recognize that from a few slides ago with our program areas. The purpose is why we exist. So for us, that's to radically shift the movement towards scale by creating high leverage investment opportunities for philanthropy to strengthen the independent financial position of movement groups. We're a funding intermediary. It's why we exist. So that may not sound like the sexiest of purpose statements, but that's literally why we're here, is to leverage philanthropic dollars into independent Rev Gen dollars. Then your mission, almost all of you have a mission. You may not have truth, vision, and purpose, but you probably have a mission. And then the embodied values, that's another thing that is a maybe you have. But that is how you do everything, how you interact with each other, how you take your work out into the world. And it's a really important element to the foundation of storytelling, because it's the thing that sort of creates your vibe and your personality and your attitude in your storytelling. The black boxes don't ever change, or one of those change every decade kind of thing. This is really your root. How does everybody feel about the current state of those 5 elements in their foundation? I am seeing smirks, Michaela.
Well, I feel good. I'm half tempted to text my communications manager to see if she's available, because we've been chatting about this off and on.
Yeah. Anybody's welcome.
Thank you. I think we do an okay job of this, and we have these things outlined, but some of the feedback we receive when we talk to our board members, who are probably the most engaged, is we don't really understand what this actually looks like and how we explain it to people. And so I think there's a disconnect and an opportunity for us to be able to do this in a way that's more meaningful for people without having to change the message every time we talk to different audiences. And so those are just some of my thoughts coming up.
Absolutely. And Michaela, one of the things we've done in one-on-one coaching with groups is we've actually built this out with a couple of groups. So if that's something you ever want an external facilitator to help with, train your board on, things like that, we are a happy and willing partner. Erica, Yasmin, Jen, any concerns on your side about making sure you've got the foundation to operationalize storytelling?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that we could benefit from like mapping this out because I think that we have it, but it would be helpful to actually map it out because we've received similar feedback.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is a common thing. Your brand isn't for you, your brand is for your constituents. It is basically the decoder ring between all of the sort of academic-y why we exist and how a consumer, you know, even though it's not retail or things like that, they're still consumers of our brand, understand us. So anybody can read these black boxes for us and get what we do. So again, if you guys want to sign up for one-on-ones, that is definitely something we can help with, facilitate that session with different departments. Okay, the blue boxes are also they are things that can change, but they don't change too often. They are like if you roll out a new program or you expand from being like an adult serving organization to incorporating like a young adult program. So these largely don't change. And if you change them, it's a pretty big deal in rollout. So the impact paths are your products. And we don't, as nonprofit practitioners, generally like to think of ourselves as having products, but it's really how do you allow, like the products that allow you to serve your mission. So for us, we give grants, we provide strategic assistance, and we facilitate learning and training through things like Fundraising Friday and our own thought leadership. So those are the three things we do that allow us to make that mission happen. So you have to be really clear on this. And I will say that most of the nonprofits we deal with, defining these impact paths are where things go really haywire. I did this exercise with South Asian Americans Leading Together a couple months ago. We had to have 20 different impact path blocks because there are a lot of programs. Nobody can talk about succinctly to a consumer the depth and breadth. So you have to have a way to organize your work in 3 to 5-ish buckets that allow you to be able to talk to a layperson who isn't deep in the family fold with you about your work. So could I tell you about the different kinds of grants we give and all of like, yes, there are like 18 cuts to that, you know, we give grants. But we have to be able to talk to a new person of we give grants, we do them for this reason, and here's how successful they are. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. I appreciate the thumbs up. The last piece of this brand anchor slide is the audiences. So this is who you talk to. For us, we're an intermediary. We have a funder audience and we have a grantee audience. That's sort of the core of our work. We split those folks between prospective and sort of current state. So you'll see funders and grantee partners, prospective funders and prospective grantee partners. And then we have broader progressive nonprofits like the folks on the phone today. And then we have our B2B community like other intermediaries who we don't seek funding from, but we seek B2B partnerships with. So again, the reason we do this on one slide is it has to be manageable. So if you have 18 different audiences, that's a big red flag. So can we cut these funders by program area, by all of those things? Yes. But at the end of the day, the thing that drives how we communicate to them is their funder status with us. Does that make sense? Yes, we're good.
I have a
Go ahead,
question.
Erica.
Yeah, so when we engage in this activity, we're thinking about the audience being revenue generating folks, right? Like not necessarily, no?
Nope, it's anybody who would be interested in your work and affected by your impact paths. So for us, we don't make any money from progressive nonprofits. They're potentially our grantee partners, but even the ones who aren't. So a lot of times, like the groups that we meet here through Fundraising Fridays are not groups that would be eligible for progressive multiplier funding, but we still don't want them to be aware of our brand and resources that we have in our learning community and things like that. So it's not about resource generation. This applies to your whole organization. So like Erica, I would assume you guys probably would have a education administrators bucket, potentially an educators bucket, maybe a legislator's bucket, some different things like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's
Okay.
the right audiences for sure.
Yeah. Erica has been one of our one-on-one crew, so I can cheat a little there. Anybody else have questions on this before we move on? Okay, as I say, don't try to do a storytelling strategy before you do this. It will be endless frustration. So save yourself the headache and the efficiency leak and do this first. And I see Violetta smiling because this is one of our own challenges, is making sure that we are telling the right story. Go ahead, V.
No, I was gonna say, totally agree. I know how that feels like. So it's a step we don't want to skip.
Yeah, because we will often want to talk about other things, right? Like things that are happening in the world. But we always have to bring it back to, why do we have a right to talk about anything? What's our impact path towards it, and who cares? So that is, like, Violetta hears that from me often when I am reviewing plans and content. My job is the sort of, I get to be the brand police. And yes, Erica, happy to share the deck. Okay, so those audiences dictate where you're telling your story. So you've probably all heard the term audience centric. Okay, sorry, I just got a text from Holly. She is fun. Tech issues. So we have to make sure that the audiences, that we don't bother investing in where the audiences we care about aren't. None of us have giant staffs. We especially don't have giant staffs to do storytelling. So again, efficiency. These are the audiences we care about. Here's where they live. So for us, our folks live in purely digital channels. Hey, Polly. So we are so glad you're okay. I'm like, oh my God, where are you?
It's been a really fluky Friday. I really apologize.
No worries. Everybody, Polly used to be a student at Fundraising Friday. She is now one of our staff members, which we are thrilled about, and has normally DC based and traveled to California. So we got time zones, we got tech. It's been a week. So no biggie. But I'm the kind of person, I'm like, oh my gosh, are they dead in a ditch? That's always my first reaction. I'm like, oh, thank goodness, everybody's okay. So our crew is purely digital. We do not bother playing in direct mail. We also know that our folks aren't generally in Facebook, because we tested it and got next to no meaningful interaction from the audiences we cared about. So we whittled down our channel menu to Instagram, Twitter, email, web, and LinkedIn. Your channel mix may look different and should look different based on who your people are. So Erica, mail is probably a thing for you, because you're dealing with education administrators and things like that. You know, most of our folks, we don't even have a physical address for, because nobody's in their office anymore, in our world. So do not bother, like when somebody tells you you have to be multi-channel and that means online, offline integration, bull. Go where your people are. That's it. Questions there? All right. So one of the channel challenges we have as an increasingly digital storytelling sector is that our life is dictated by algorithms. So everybody knows there are algorithms in Facebook and Instagram and anything that sort of dictate how often your content gets seen, by whom, etc. A big part of manipulating the algorithm is the volume and the relevancy that you feed into it. So based on 2022 research, this is the ideal cadence for these different channels that we at Progressive Multiplier live in. 2 to 4 emails a month, blogging 2 to 4 times a week, 3 to 7 times a week on Instagram, 1 to 2 times a day on Facebook, 1 to 5 tweets a day on Twitter, and 1 to 5 times a day on LinkedIn. So that is ideal. However, Violetta is one person, and this isn't her whole job. So we do about 20% of that. And again, is it ideal? No. Does it make us masters of the algorithm? No. But it's where we are and it's what we can do. It also means we know how far we are from being fully staffed in our marketing. And that's something that's valuable to know too, that that's sort of your growth trajectory. So this could easily be like the outbound content we're going to talk about today could easily be one person's whole job as opposed to just 60% of Violetta. It could probably be 1.5 people's jobs. So start with the ideal. We know scientifically that's where it is, and scale back from that based on your bandwidth. That's real. So we do 1 to 3 emails a month, depending on if we're promoting something. We blog once a month. We Instagram once or twice a week. We tweet or retweet once a day. We have probably double the retweets to original tweets just for content efficiency's sake. And then we LinkedIn post once or twice a week. So this is what's real for us. Any discussion there or questions?
I have, just for clarification, what does a blog look like in this context?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Our blogs vary. So most of our blogs are a little meatier. So if you can crank out super short blogs and you can do them more often, great, because it gives you more content to play with. Our work is a little bit geeky and nuanced. It is very hard to talk about stories quickly. So our blogs, and you can see them on our website. If you go to the navigation, it's under our Insights tab. They're usually me interviewing grantees, or they're case study based and telling kind of a deeper story about one of the projects we've done, or it's introducing one of our cohorts. Like we just onboarded 11 grantees that are doing Deep South civic engagement or stuff like that. So that's what our blogs look like. We certainly have grantee partners who blog like weekly, and they're short snippets like, we did this week. We were, in legislative session and we were pushing these things, or and they're more like news quick hits. So that's really just depends on what kind of content you've got. It's a great question though. Does that answer it?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Sure.
I think
And
one of the really important things to sort of think about here is that we can always get really bogged down on the best practice and what all the experts say, and that will make us like truly successful. And I think that that can get in the way. That can be totally noise. And doing this satisfies the need for us to like keep talking to our people and letting them keep hearing our voice and hearing our stories, but in the way that works for us. So like, I don't know if this is for everybody else, but for me, if I had the ideal storytelling timeline in front of me, I would be like freaking out constantly. Like, how am I going to get 2 to 4, 2 to 4, 3 to 7, like the quantity would just start to feel like a mountain overwhelming me. But like, oh, let me just schedule this one email. I can do this one email this week.
yeah,
it just makes it much more bite-sized and easier. And I think, for me, I always like turn best practices into like our practices. And I think this is a really good way to just say, look, do what you have to do, keep communicating, but do it in a way that works for you. As you grow, this can grow.
Yeah. And I love having the growth trajectory, because then when somebody asks for budget and you have the data to say this is working, and if we put another body towards this and we could get closer to that algorithmically optional cadence, great. V, do you want to talk about what happened when we tried to do the ideal cadence?
I was going to jump in and say that a lot of it is also about the consistency. So if it's overwhelming and it's a lot of content to put out and then we go radio silence, that's worse than just sticking to little buckets of content that are consistent and that just keeps us in the conversation and keeps our audience engaged with who we are and what we're doing. So it's definitely better to scale down and work what's possible and realistic than just quit entirely and be frustrated and say, I don't like social media, this sucks, let's focus on something else. So I think
that's
one
never
of the
happened
biggest,
with us.
yeah, that's one of the biggest lessons.
Yes.
We have gone silent, and it's not good.
Yeah,
So
it costs you all the algorithmic juice you've built when you go silent. So start small.
that's the thing with the algorithm, that as long as we keep posting at a consistent rate, it's better than just quitting for bigger chunks of time and then coming back once you feel ready to create some content.
Yeah, awesome. Any questions on building your ideal schedule or how we got here? All right, and Raphael, welcome to the party. Good to see you. Okay, so before we get into our 5 elements of storytelling, so we've got the foundation, the slide with all the boxes, gotta have that, have to be realistic about the cadence. And then you have to also be realistic if this is not somebody's whole job. There's probably nobody on this phone who this is their whole, storytelling is their whole job. Even Violetta, where that is literally her title, this piece of it is not her whole job, it's 60% of it. So you have to make sure, because you have to feed the algorithm beast in digital storytelling, and the consistency matters, even if it is an unideal volume, it has to be consistent, which means you have to plan your production systems for consistency. So this is what we do here. Anything you see in sort of that lovely salmony color, that has to do with this storytelling, the digital storytelling that Violetta does on a consistent month-to-month basis. Anything in gray is where she has to fit in the other 40% of her job. And for V, that is maintaining the website, that is working on our podcast, that is keeping collateral materials updated, that is making like press contacts, anything else. Working with our graphic designer if we're doing stuff. So make sure you set yourself or your staff up for success and build a model that says, okay, if here's our realistic timeline and we're gonna make this 60% of your job, here's what that 60% looks like, or 30% or 50%, whatever that is for you guys based on your reel. But don't start trying to do this until you've got this built. Does that make sense? Okay.
I just want to highlight the importance of setting this calendar and really sticking out to that process. So it's very, very important step to lay out.
What happens to your life if you don't?
It goes crazy. My brain smooshes and I just want to throw my computer out the window. So in an attempt to prevent that, this is what we do.
Because if you miss a day or 2 in a row of this stuff, it piles quickly, and then you are algorithmically screwed because you can't keep up with the consistency. This is not hard, it is not rocket science, but it is rigor, and it's making sure, like, if Violetta wants to go on vacation, that I'm there to pick up those steps that she's going to miss on the days that she's going to be out, so we don't ever go dead. All right. V, can you tell us how we have found efficiencies with tools, yeah. cheap or free tools?
Cheap or free tools are always your best friends when managing social media. I will say that one of the best ones is the scheduling system. There are many softwares that help you schedule your content. That way you don't have to do the manual work. For us, the one that's working is Later. They have 50% off for nonprofits if you submit your application. And it lets you schedule LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So pretty much all of the channels except for email, but that's another beast. It also helps with tracking the analytics. They have different tiers and we've chosen one that best fits our needs at the moment. So scheduling works, we're using Later. Also Canva. Canva is free for nonprofits, and that's where all of our graphic designs live and where I make the edits for our posts. And because I'm not a graphic designer, I have to work with a graphic designer that we onboarded. Well, it's a consultant graphic designer that I work with to craft the visions that I have for different posts that I want to work with. So I get the templates and then I just have to work on creating the content, filling it in, and Canva is a very easy to use tool for non-techie or non-graphic designers like myself.
Yeah, and for most of us, we don't have like the expensive graphic design skills or the tech skills in-house. So thinking through the tools and resources your non-tech, non-creative staff need to manage storytelling is really important. So we actually were able to find a freelance graphic designer. I have used graduate student graphic designers before and did this whole suite of social media posts, email templates, also our collateral materials, our PowerPoint decks, and we've gotten them all done like under $1,500 all in. So find good partners. There are tons of them out there. If you need referrals, please let us know, because this is sort of how you stay consistent with a small staff, is to put the time and energy in upfront into building the library. The other thing we do are silly things like find the right calendar templates in PowerPoint that allow us to do like drag and drop planning together, for a cheap subscription to Slide Model. So you don't need the big fancy scheduling tools. You don't need the big fancy like content generation tools or graphic designer in-house. Our marketing budget is super skinny, under $5,000 for the year. So definitely holler if there are any tools that you would be interested in. Okay, so let's put all this stuff to work. So we've got Violetta set up for success in terms of like her calendar. We know we're only going to do about 20% of an ideal cadence. We've built the resources to make sure that she can do quick replicable work that's all pretty and brand compliant. So we're going to go through the 5 elements and show how they actually come to life in our content plan. So the first element we talked about last week are the content categories of always on, franchise, and moment in time. So we're going to go back to our favorite wall of bricks slide. The orange is all of our content, and this should change more frequently. Remember, the black hardly ever changes, like takes an act of Congress kind of change. The blue, it's a big deal if it changes because you've rolled out a new program. But the stories that you tell change annually, maybe, based on what your focuses are and things like that. Evergreen content, those are stories you can tell every day, all the time. You don't need a calendar-driven event, anything like that. So for us, we have 6 buckets, 1 for each of our program areas, 1 about our team, 1 that we call of philanthropy, where we lift up our institutional funders and the sort of institutional philanthropic perspective on revenue generation. And on the opposite side, we have of the movement, where we're actually lifting up our partners and movement group voices about revenue generation topics. We can do that all day long, every day. Our franchise content, consider that more like you're organizing around a date on a calendar, you're doing something around a season. It's more campaigny. So we have an in the news franchise where that encapsulate, like if we want to do a series around Pride Month next month, that would be in the news. We have a franchise around the events that we host, like we do funder briefings every quarter, any initiatives that we've got launched, and then any of our own thought leadership that we publish. So those are things that are more episodic. They happen over and over again, but we aren't always talking about a funder briefing. We aren't always talking about Pride. And then we leave room for moment in time content. And this moment in time can either be like the oh shit moment, like the SCOTUS leak, or it can be an unexpected gift of content, like we're part of a collaborative of other funding intermediaries. And I just got word yesterday that the resource library that they built is done. And we want to push that out. So that's moment in time content. It's not urgent, but it wasn't something we planned for. So those are the content categories. Again, if this is solid in the black and the blue, saying, okay, what are the stories we can tell to these people about this stuff we do and our why every day, sometimes, and then maybe for a day. So this is the next thing to build. Questions there? All right. So the second element is content modes. So the first step in operationalizing, come up with your content categories in each of those 3 buckets. Then the modes are basically, how do you take those buckets and mix them together in the right ratios based on what's going on in your world. So just as a reminder, your 3 content modes are steady state. So that's nothing big's happening. It is business as usual. So that means we're going to mostly be leading into those evergreen, always on topics like those 6 that we have, with a little bit of our franchise content and a little bit of room to accommodate anything that comes down the pike. If it's a promotion mode, that means you have an event on the calendar, there's a campaign on the calendar, there's something that you need to weight more heavily than the stuff you talk about all the time. And then takeover is like all in, 90% of what we're talking about is this one thing. And this usually lasts like for a day or 2. So I always give the example of like, if you are a big end of year fundraising organization, December 31st, you're not talking about anything but fundraising. Or if it's election day and you're a civic engagement crew, you are not talking about anything but election. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's how we then start. Notice we've got our Happy Frappy calendar again. We actually have a deck with this calendar built for all 12 months that actually has Violetta's what she has to do on each day. And we use this as a planning tool to then just literally drag and drop what's happening when. So this is where we start every month when we do our planning. We pick our mode first. So we make sure the calendar contains all of the activities that are happening that we care about. So holidays in July. So this is our actual calendar for July, 4th of July, obviously. On the 12th, we're hosting a webinar with Erica Smiley from Jobs with Justice and Sarita Gupta from Ford Foundation about their book called The Future We Need, and the revenue generation themes in it. And then on the 17th is our 4th birthday here at Progressive Multiplier. So those are our 3 big events for July. So what mode are we going to be in? Steady state, promotion.
Promotion.
All right, let's see if you are correct. Boo, promotion. Because we've got stuff that needs some significant flight of promotion. So our content's going to be weighted heavier towards those event pieces. So, and it is the event franchise that we are going to be promoting because we have got this really, really big one with some really, really big names that we want to get all of our funders to say, yes, this is really important, and really smart people are saying it's important. So please give us money so we can do our jobs. We all know that drip. The one thing I will point out here is this touches square at the bottom. This is actually mapped, like, so there is an icon for every post that's accommodated on our 20% of ideal plan. So we literally just drag and drop these. It makes the planning easier, and we can share screens and move it around and things like that. This may not work for you. You may be a spreadsheet person, but this is, we have found to be a helpful tool in actually doing that work.
I was going to say that the first time that we started doing our planning was with a spreadsheet, and that just wasn't working for my brain. So that's also part of like finding the process that works for each person and how they're actually set up for success and what will allow them to execute a successful planning. And I'm loving our new calendar. So
I will say that for all of the team leads on the phone, that has been one of the most humbling learning lessons for me in the last 6 months, taking over as executive director, is each of my team members are amazing, wildly talented, and the 5 of us could not be wired more differently in how our brains work and what we need to produce optimal work. So slowing down enough to take the time to like learn that spreadsheets just make V go like completely blank and crazy. And that like Polly and I both need a hell of a lot of context to be able to formulate our own plans. Like everybody has their thing that they need. Invest in the tools, especially for something that's as sort of high production when it comes to storytelling. Make sure whoever's responsible for it, you're meeting them where they are in their planning brain, because it's likely not the same as your own. So good call out, B. So the next step for us here is we actually say, okay, if we're going to go 50% primary franchise, we know our primary franchise is going to be around this event. So we start blocking off and color coding what are the 50% of our touches that we're going to dedicate to that. And we do the same with the 20% other. And the same for the 20% always on. These percentages aren't sacrosanct. It's more about the ratio and the weight. So you're going to hear more from us. You're going to get 6, 7, 8 touches and a good chunk of our e-news out of all of our touches around that event and follow-up and things like that. You're going to see a little less for our other franchises and a little less for our always on. But this is one of those things that just helps keep it clear for us. And then what we do is we fly those touches out and we flight them around where these dates are. So this was 4th of July, and we know we're going to use 4th of July to really kick up social around this event on the 12th. We know we've got the event on the 12th. We've got our birthday on the 17th. So, and then we've started floating everything else in there. Notice there isn't a business day when we're not active. Some of these are just these little gray birdies are the retweets. So that is a super light lift for Violetta to do versus the original content that's in the colored icons. You'll notice we always stack our blog and our e-news at the end of the month. That's always going to be the Monday and the Tuesday at the end of the month. And we've thought about things like, okay, if Violetta needs to do the e-news testing on the 22nd, we're just going to retweet. She's got other things to do that day. So it's blending that sort of what does it take to produce with what are the optimal, what's the data telling you to do and what are your activities telling you to do. So V, do you want to jump in here in terms of how the performance data affects how you plan or is emerging to affect how you plan?
Yes. So right now, Twitter is the one where we get the most engagement, which is why you'll probably see that we're focusing more on the retweets and trying to stay engaged so we can feed that algorithmic juice. And then just trying to really look at when our audience is the most active on Twitter, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, so that we can really hone on those publishing dates and feed the algorithmic juice. Yep. So looking at the data really lets me play around with best times to post, best type of content that's working. So captions and quotes versus images and videos and things like that. So really looking at the data makes that difference.
And it goes for email as well and blog content as well. So not just social media, that's top of mind because social media is the hardest to manage. But, there's a reason we send our emails on Tuesday at 10 a.m. because that's when we get the most open rates. You'll see a pattern in how we headline our blogs because we found that gets us the most click-ins to it. Things like that. So, and that's just data you're always going to be establishing over time. So mapping out what you do when is a combination of what your data tells you to do and what your calendar driven stuff tells you to do.
Yes, and we also started with what were the best practices industry-wise and have been shaping that based on what the posts have been telling us and what the data has been really speaking to.
Yeah, that's a great point, V. Always start with what's out there as best practice and then make it your own. Okay. Any questions on how we drag and drop all of our happy little birdies and everything else and why we do it the way we do it? And are we crazy or does this seem useful to anybody else on the call, just this format and kind of way we're working through it?
Maybe we're a little crazy.
I embrace our crazy. It's all good. But yeah, you have to make it your own. This is where the visual in these spreadsheets
makes the planning fun.
Yes. All right. So the one thing I want to flag is that we have an e-news. And as we mentioned with our templates, we had a template created. That's what you see on the right. So you'll see the lorem ipsum placeholder text and things like that. But this, even though it is one email, we treat it as 10 different touches in that plan. So we weight it similarly. So we know if we have weighted a lot around that webinar that we're hosting on the 12th, we want to make sure that we give it a good amount of weight in our e-news to continue that theme. And it gives us, because it's the end of the month after the event, we're going to do a recap and, we're actually going to highlight one of the book reviews or things like that. So make sure that if you are sending out any content, direct mail pieces, e-newses that have multiple elements, that you actually, from a production and planning standpoint, look at each, what we call it in an e-news as a module separately versus just an e-news. Our feature emails tend to be more singular. It'll be like an invitation to the webinar. You would see those if you saw our June calendar, versus our e-news is a 10-part extravaganza. Any questions there? All right. So that was elements 1 and 2. 3, 4, and 5 are where your planning gets really exciting. So if you think of 1 and 2 as sort of the framework of the house, 3, 4, and 5 are the furniture and the throw pillows and the paint colors and everything else. So assets, messaging frames, and messaging lenses. So this is how you plan your channel appropriate pictures, words, videos, graphics, and everything else. This is where, and for those of you who weren't here last week, I've put these slides in here so they were there for reference. Any of the copy and the images, make sure you're creating them with the publishing channels in mind and that you create multi-purpose assets. You'll see that, you know, in our assets that we created up front in our library, they can easily be sized to different social media channels, but it's the same base graphic, stuff like that. Again, none of us will ever have marketing fully funded and staffed, so think about those efficiency tools. And creating that baseline library, the evergreen content, like stuff that we could post any day of the week, when we're in that steady state mode where we're doing 70% evergreen storytelling, that really helps give you coverage when holidays, staff vacations, somebody gets sick or has a baby or whatever. So just make sure that you are putting some time into creating those libraries. And it's a little bit at a time. Don't think of it as a giant project. Like if you can create one asset, you know, every 10 days or something like that, stick it in the library. Awesome. The other thing about asset creation is there are tons and tons of free tools out there, like apps to create awesome social graphics. There are apps to turn your stuff into illustrations, all for free. You know, you can do easy, quick videos. You know, it doesn't have to be professionally produced. So really get creative when we think about the words and images and what that means now. Just as a quick reminder, when we talk about messaging frames, a lot of us often have to tell the same story over and over and over again, especially in the nonprofit space. So it's like, if we are feeding hungry people, that is a story. And we should be able to tell it through these 4 different frames. So what is the issue around food insecurity? How are we, as Fresh Approach or any other of the food insecurity groups on the phone are solving for it? Why should whoever we're talking about care, and what happens if they don't? And then giving them an action for how they can help. And even if you're not thinking about donor communication, this fits for anybody. So this is how we, like when you think about how you consume content, like if you're just reading an article for information, or you're reading an article for learning impact around something like climate change, or, you know, so really think, like, just keep this list in mind the next time you read your news feed, and you'll actually see how these fit into any content you consume. Similarly with the messaging lens, when we tell the same story over and over, if you mix those 4 frames with either a singular lens or a many lens, like telling the story of one versus the story of systemic impact or things like that, that really helps you tell a more holistic story, and it lets you get a lot of juice for the squeeze out of your content. So when this boils down to planning, this is where I get my spreadsheet. So Violetta gets her icons and drag and drops. And I get my spreadsheet on this one because I do think this kind of planning is easiest in a spreadsheet because of the publishing date. It just helps sort of keep your mind straight. So we take that calendar and we do all of our publishing dates and channels and basic topics if they were event driven. And then we start filling in. So we did the production date through the topic of the touch last night. So we know that on that 4th of July, we're going to do 4th of July posts. We know that before the webinar, we're doing calls for registration, and then we're immediately doing webinar recaps. We're then taking a break from that promotion, and we're starting to do some of our other franchise and evergreen content. We're actually going to be introing, we're introing our now fully staffed team one by one. I think this is going to be Andrea. We're going to do our birthday shout out, because we're using our birthday as the anchor for our blog content of where revenue generation has been in the last 4 years. So you'll see that we just started slating in topics based on the calendar and what we knew was popular and our promotional mix. And so then Violetta, and what she gets to do is really think through the creative vision for each touch. What assets are needed from who, and is there a message lens or frame that we want to incorporate as part of that planning? So V, do you want to talk about that piece and actually thinking through, okay, if I say, yep, we need a 4th of July social suite, go. Where do you start?
I start by going back, as always, to our vision, brand, truth, to make sure that whatever stories I'm telling actually match to our branding and our messaging. And then I'll really try to be as creative as I can in how to connect the dots between what we do as a funding intermediary and what our audience will be interested in hearing. I will outline the concept of the post. So is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a carousel? And all of that's also tied to the metrics and what my data is telling me that's working and resonating with our audience. And then it comes the fun part, which is the writing the copy and the captions for each of the posts once we're in production.
And again, you'll see the e-news pieces because we're thinking through production planning here and who's going to write what and who's going to collect the assets needed for what. We've treated each module as its own line, so that we don't miss and go like, oh, we have an e-news due today, and we didn't do all the 10 things we need to do. Any questions on that? You guys said you wanted to see the sausage making, virtually speaking, so. All right. So the one thing to remember when you do production planning is that you always have at least 2 months happening at the same time when you're looking at planning, production, and measurement. So we showed you the June calendar. This is the July calendar. So by the time we hit July 1, the only content that isn't done is July's e-news, because that's a little more real time in its interest. But all of the social stuff will already have been planned the month prior. It will already have been produced the month prior. And by the time we hit the 1st, Violetta already has it loaded up into later to publish on the day that she said it. So that way that she is working on the next month's content plan. So she'll be doing the August social content. We'll start that planning on July 5th. And you'll see here on July 25th, she'll be scheduling all of the August posts. So that's what I mean when you always have 2 months kind of going at the same time. So be really thoughtful about how you jive those two together so that you don't always end up with like, yay, we finished a month and then you're starting over. You actually, you have to plan this so that it's an ongoing cycle. And that may be like a, well, no duh, but that's something where we've actually gotten a little tripped up before we got our engine moving, was not being far enough ahead on the channels we could be, and then getting behind because the load was so heavy on some of the channels that are a little more real time. So that's what I got. Hopefully this meets the need that you guys outlined of you wanted to see how did we actually take these 5 concepts and make them come alive in our storytelling. What questions do you have, or what processes of your own do you want to hammer through? What can we talk about that would be of use? As you hear my dog thumping down the stairs in the background. Rafaela? I see your hand up, my friend. And then Michaela too.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm sorry, I missed the first part. It was another meeting, but and I'm not sure if actually it's relevant to the topic. It's most about process and not about content. Mine is
No, go
more
ahead.
about storytelling content for a fundraising perspective, more appealing kind of thing. I've been like doing that for several years, and I would say my framework, my approach to tell a story where we'll have then an ask or just even a stewardship with donors is start always from a need of the community or a need of a person, if we feature a story, and then kind of move or how we fix it, right? And then just recently, I attended this webinar about assets framing. So moving from how we should move to be more an equity lens from instead of, this deficit kind of framing towards instead of focusing on the need, on what is missing, on the aspiration, and move from there. And I found it extremely challenging, especially when we talk about our case is food, like that's the need. So it's been so hard to reframe this, especially when it comes to ask for donors. And I wonder if you have some examples, some more like, I only heard one perspective about this, so I'm not, I know the full picture how you should do it.
Yeah, always take an expert's opinion, including mine, with a giant grain of salt. So because like that is our field is ripe with talent and opinions, all valid. Nothing is sacrosanct in my mind, unless the data tells you it is. So for me, we definitely are seeing a trend in a desire for different storytelling from donors, in that, I was kind of raised in the traditional, like, donor is hero and show the need and let them fill it and all of that kind of stuff. And that is definitely sort of quote unquote out of fashion for a lot of reasons. It is still the easiest way to make money, but it has come under a lot of ethical scrutiny of, should you, be doing that sort of more extractive kind of storytelling, that should you be putting forth more agency and hope for the people affected by whatever the work is that you're doing. And it doesn't convert as well for traditional donors typically, but it is, I think, the right way to go, because I think we've spent a lot of decades as an industry doing that sort of extractive, like trauma, like 70s fly in the eye, starving kid kind of fundraising. Then we have to evolve as practitioners beyond that. I think there's a way to demonstrate need without desperation. And I think using like the messaging frames and lenses and actually doing an activity, and Raphael, this is something that if you guys wanted to sign up for another block of hours, Polly or I could certainly work through, is how do we take your core story as Fresh Approach and what are the stories you should tell with an informational frame? What are the impact stories? What are the risk stories? What are the action stories? And how do you layer the right accompanying messengers onto that, whether it is someone who uses your mobile food trucks, or somebody who is on staff, or somebody who can make the connections between food insecurity and democracy and environment and all of those sort of bigger things that we know that food insecure communities are often, it is an intersectional issue around poverty and accessibility. So I think there are, you have a like really rich ability to tell a story, but I do think that it is kind of a cultural shift for us as a sector to tell it, I think, a better way. Holly, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I think you basically nailed it. I think that so one of the ways that I started to reframe the donor as hero frame is to, in my, when I could, was to turn it to, I started to use this cliche many years ago, heroes and humanitarians. And I reframed the hero as as either frontline worker type people, or the people who are that we're supporting or the providing services. It's not the most elegant way to frame it. And what I tried to do was try to reframe to say that we need the humanitarians out there to help to get the hero work done. And when I tested it, I actually found that there was almost no difference between the donors feeling loved as being a hero versus stepping into this role as seeing themselves as humanitarians. Like, I can't be an activist, but I can write a check type of a thing, you know? And I was worried at first that we were going to drop people off because they've gotten for so many decades so much love of being told that they are the reason why we're doing all this stuff, and reframing and going, no, the workers are the people who are doing the stuff. You're helping us do the stuff, or the folks who are in the struggle are the folks in the struggle. And I did not notice too much affinity lost. In fact, I felt like I saw it climb, partly because the humanitarians don't have that much of a negative side to them yet. It could possibly change. That might be a way to sort of play with the frame, is to just start to redirect. But I agree. I think that we have to. I think that there are ways to tell these stories without demeaning the people who are receiving aid or whatever that we're doing, or exploiting the poverty, or trauma porn, or participating in any of that. But still, pulling the heartstrings in a way that are still necessary. We're sentient beings.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like, I've totally stepped in it, in drafts where I've shared with colleagues, and people were like, ew, fix this language. And and I was like, oh man, yes, I will absolutely fix this language. But I think you just have to do some trial and error. And that's the sort of the nice thing about using technology, is that unlike direct mail, you don't have to wait weeks, if not months, before you can do the analysis. The analysis goes much faster.
Yeah. Raphael, does that help?
Yeah, I mean, it helps to feel like we're in the same boat. So
Yeah, you are definitely not alone. And as I say, if you want to like workshop one of your appeals, we can definitely do that. That's something we'd be happy to do. So just reach out. Michaela, you had a question too on this, or
Yeah, I think
unrelated question?
We've chatted and talked about. It was helpful to hear the conversation. It was in similar tone to this. I think one piece that I'm really interested in trying to do better is how to know what is resonating with our different audiences. And because we still have such a high touch with our high net worth individuals and our grantors, sometimes we don't see anything back when we send out a message.
Right.
Part of that's because we're still using traditional emailing from personal accounts and not service. And I don't know what it would take for us to transition to something like that. And talking out loud, it might just be having better surveys and getting data sets from people. But yeah, like we have a group of high net worth individuals that we want to continue to nurture and then cultivate new donors, but not understanding or knowing how to use the right lenses and messages consistently, so that we're speaking their language, is where I would love some any brainstorming or chatter.
Sure. How many folks are you talking about? Because the pot of people and how big it is, it sort of depends on how I go about this.
Yeah, we're about 18 of the high net worth individuals, and then our grantors very, within the 20 number.
Okay, so 18-ish donors, like, that you could actually potentially sit down with, or that kind of thing. Okay. So if it were a higher number and you were talking a couple hundred, I would change the text so you could actually track the data. But with as few as 18 people, if you could divide and conquer between your senior staff to do some actual fact finding, And the trick to me is setting up the fact finding so it can actually be actionable. So if we know, like in our e-news, we have 2 big stories we tell a month. I need to know which categories of content get clicked on. So we don't want to say, give the open field of what do you want to hear from us about? Because that's not going to get you actionable data. Think about the stories you can tell, those orange buckets. So do that work first and then say, like, which of these do you want updates on? What kind of updates do you want? Do you want data updates? Do you want stories from the field? Do you want researcher, based information, like so think about the stories you have the capability to tell, and then the ways you could tell it, and give them essentially that menu. I think that's probably how I would go about getting at that, with that number of people. And then if that pool grows, getting a free email tool like, MailChimp or HubSpot or something like that, that all have free versions when you've got lower constituent lists, and track the actual click data.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
No, I do think that that's really the way to go. When you have that number of people, you just have to think of it as sort of like an organizing relationship. Like you need to build the relationship, find out information, start storing that information so that you can then, use it, not in a transactional kind of a way, but in that when you're meeting 18 people all at once, you're going to forget who has the dog and who has the cat. And just, but you'll, the prospective donors and donors are just incredibly like giving of information about themselves because they feel in relationship with you. So just keep that in a way that you can then honor it later and refer to it, and you'll build from there. But I agree. I think that as you grow, those tools will become much more important, because it's just 18 is just too small a sample to know big universal truths.
Yep. Michaela, does that help?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
What other questions do we have, folks?
So I have a question that I would be asking if I wasn't on staff now.
All right. I think we'll allow questions from staff.
Is that allowed? I don't know.
As long as the group can learn from it, bring it.
So my question is when I've been in these positions where I've had to like create these content calendars, if I said in this webinar, my oppositional thinking brain would sometimes go, oh yeah, that would work for you, but it won't work for me. So what happens, if Polly, development director at XYZ nonprofit, my boss keeps coming in and is like, today we have to talk about this. And yesterday it was this other topic. And how do I try to plan content that I know is the right content to plan when every other day the boss is coming in and saying, I've got to put this message out, or I've got to do this favor for our coalition partner, or I've got to. So how do these tools how could I use these tools to help me in that situation?
That is an excellent question. And I do actually have
an excellent question.
Is anybody else looking at what we've built and go like having that oppositional troublemaker reaction that Polly tends to have of like, that must be nice to be able to run your business like that? You're totally allowed to say that here. So for me, and this only has happened since I have been in my mid 40s and have gotten much crankier. I could not have done this 15 years ago. So first, as the development person, I'm in charge of raising X dollars. That is my primary KPI. That is why I am employed to be in the seat. So for me, being really clear on where storytelling and fundraising mix, and with the chain of command. So in my experience, usually you're talking two to three touches of non-fundraising to every touch of fundraising when you're talking about a appeal-based fundraising program, which is not what we have because we don't do individual fundraising, we do all institutional fundraising. but it's the same mix, right? Your promotions are just around appeal campaigns, not like you're hosting a webinar. So for me, saying, if you want me to raise this much money, here's what I need to be able to do. You tell me, in planning these non-fundraising touches, what do you need me to accommodate? So we had a presentation a couple months ago we called Metrics That Matter. There's a slide in there that shows you how to frame this conversation. So that's where I'd start. And for any of the younger folks on the phone who aren't cranky 40 somethings, that like, I get that is a really hard conversation to have up the chain with your boss, but you have to be protective of what it takes for you to produce the thing you're being held accountable to. So I wish somebody had said that to me and said, don't be about being people pleasing, protect your pathway to do great work. I think that's the best piece of advice I would start with, is protect your path to do great work. And great work requires you to make sure everybody is on the same page with these black and blue boxes, and then to collaboratively come up with the orange. Because if your ED is coming to you and saying, we need this, we need that, because Violetta gets to hold my feet to the fire when I do that and say, do this. And she can go, there is no home for that. And then if we have enough of those instances, we create a home for that. But it's not me taking advantage of the fact that she is incredibly accommodating and talented and will bend over backwards to do the work right. But that it's, her saying, hey, you've now asked me to post a half a dozen job postings for our partners. Let's create a container for that in our e-news, and we'll do that once a month. And me being like, great, awesome. So it is that two-way street. I think it's being, making sure everybody's on the same page about the brand anchors and the stories we tell about them. It's protecting your pathway to do great work, and knowing, what that is. And then I think it's also being open to, not just saying I want to do it this way, but hey, yeah, these are legitimate needs of my colleagues, and how do we work them into the larger plan in a way that is replicable, not going to squish me, all that. Is that a fair answer?
I think so. I like that. I didn't ask the question, but I love the answer.
I actually think what also is really good about even just the system is that in that protect your path to do great work thinking, is that if you are planning 2 months ahead, those little nuggets that you can just set and forget by using later or any other tools at your disposal, might even give you the spaciousness to accommodate sometimes, because we all know that sometimes you just have to accommodate the boss, right?
Yes.
So it might, if you can get into this habit where you can, especially the easy peasy ones where you can just like set and forget, it might create the room for you to be able to go, I'm going to do this. Let me explain why I'm doing what I'm doing, but I'll do this one. But I really need to put the guardrails up to protect my work, or I'm not going to be able to be as successful as I can be.
Yeah. And that's why we always, like, in any of the modes, you'll see 10% unplanned, 10% unplanned, 5% unplanned, because shit happens, whether it's internal or external. In our external world, like SCOTUS leak, DACA coming down, like any of those things affect what we're communicating on or what our grantees need from us. And then there are the internal things, like your executive director goes, this is so cool, please share this. And Violetta rolls her eyes and digs into her unplanned time. So does that help anybody? And does that resonate? All right. Yasmin, Lauren, are you guys getting what you need? I want to make sure, I know you're welcome to be off camera. I just want to make sure that we're answering all questions.
I am. I'll say, I'm enjoying listening. I think for me, I think this is something I'll have to kind of go back to my team about, because, I'm fairly new to my company, but I think our comms team has a certain social media routine down that even though they're very conscientious about development in general, I don't think our individual giving isn't robust enough that our social media strategy is informed by
Consideration, yeah.
individual giving. I'm also thinking a lot about like a lot of this I've done previously in like kind of private sector, like marketing roles.
Yeah.
And in that case, the platforms we were using, you know, different platforms that were more based
Robust.
on our consumers and that kind of thing. And so I think I'm also thinking a bit about that, like how the platform you choose makes a difference in terms of your audience. Because I can imagine like we're primarily using social media around, you know, campaigns and when we've released collateral and that kind of thing. And so that's sort of a different audience than potentially people that would want to donate, because I'm sure there are people that might want to donate because they care about, you know, we work in educational equity, that aren't necessarily interested in like a white paper or, you know, specific political advocacy work. So
and
think about.
Where are you with Yasmin?
I'm at Edtrust West.
Edtrust West, that's right. Okay, so you work with Erica.
Yeah.
So yes, and I think it's funny because I've had this conversation with Chris, your ED, of like, what you guys do is amazing. And it is written in such an academic way, it is really hard for anybody who isn't a hardcore practitioner in the education space to get it and care about the amazingness of the work, and also the big problem around equity in California in the education space. So it is sort of a coming together based on your business goals. So if you don't need to grow an individual donor program, or that's not a giant priority, that more accessible communication might not be important. When I've done this at places like, I used to work in healthcare, this looked very different. Like the channel mix was, you know, a lot of like professional journals and things like that, but we weren't on Instagram, you know, but it's still that, where's the audience you actually want to play with you? And that may mean that your channels are things like research journals as well as Instagram, or it may be one or the other. So I think the bottom line is to make sure you're doing communications planning in an enterprise way, so that the comms team isn't over here and develop's not over here and your program team's not over here. Because at the end of the day, you should have enterprise level audience segments. Like we care about educators, we care about ed administrators, we care about legislators, we care about potential small dollar donors. Like everybody should have the same audience definitions. And I think that's really where it starts, is what stories should we be telling about what we do and who cares about them? So that slide with the big blocks, everybody should do that. And everybody who communicates for your organization should be in on that collaboration. And it may like look at it as additive and evolutionary to what they're already doing versus like, no, do it this way. But it's like, okay, are they maybe missing an audience or two? Or there may be potential donor programs because they know of audiences you don't, you know, things like that. Does that help?
That definitely helps. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right. I know we are almost at time. Any final questions, thoughts, need for tools, etc.? I scroll to the end here. Not seeing any hands. All right. So Red Letter Day here on Fundraising Friday. We are officially throwing Polly under the bus to answer questions. She's now ending week 3. So yeah, no, you're in it. So if you have questions about anything Fundraising Fridays or one-on-one, please reach out to either of us. She gets another month before I'm like, no, just reach out to Polly. I will always be here for Fundraising Friday. Our next class is June 10th. I'm super excited. Nonprofit industrial complex. We're gonna get into it. Polly and I will be co-teaching that class. So it will be a little bit different. So definitely send us your questions. Send us things you want to see next school year starting in July. And holler if we can be of any service. Have great weekends, guys.